You still have time to correct this. General Marcus Reed said the words so calmly that Officer Daniel Mercer almost smiled. To Mercer, they sounded like the last attempt of a man who had finally realized he had no control over what happened next. But Marcus wasn't pleading. He wasn't threatening him either. He was giving him a choice. It was 8:47 on a clear Tuesday morning outside the east gate of Fort Grant, where the American flag moved gently above rows of brick buildings and young soldiers crossed the grounds beneath the pale Virginia sun. Less than 20 yards from the security checkpoint, Marcus stood perfectly still, dressed in a dark civilian jacket, pressed gray slacks, and polished black shoes. Nothing about him announced what he had spent more than 3 decades becoming. No decorati de uniforme, no entourage, no visible stars. Just a 58-year-old black man facing a white police officer who had already decided that something about him did not belong. I said, "Get on the ground." Mercer repeated, louder now. Conversations near the gate stopped. A young sergeant carrying a folder slowed his steps. 2 soldiers beside a parked government vehicle turned toward the voice. Marcus looked at Mercer, then briefly toward the people watching. Imagine having spent your entire adult life teaching men and women how to remain disciplined when pressure strips away comfort, certainty, and pride, only to find yourself standing in front of someone who mistakes that discipline for weakness. Marcus knew exactly what everyone was waiting for. Anger, an argument, a raised voice, something Mercer could point to afterward and call resistance. Marcus gave him none of it. "Officer," he said quietly, "you have my identification." Mercer's expression hardened. "And I'm giving you an order." Marcus's eyes shifted toward the identification card Mercer had barely examined. For 1 second, something changed in his face, not fear, not even frustration, but disappointment. And he looked toward the base again. Beyond the gate, a clock mounted near the administrative building showed the same time as his watch. 8:47. Somewhere inside that installation, a conference room was already being prepared. Coffee had been poured. Briefing folders had been placed around a long, polished table. Senior officers were checking their watches because one chair remained empty. Mercer knew none of that. He saw only the man standing in front of him. Marcus slowly lowered himself to the pavement, controlled and deliberate, keeping his hands visible. The silence around the checkpoint became heavier. One soldier looked away. Another didn't. Sergeant Thomas Walker, 29 years old and halfway across the gate, suddenly stopped moving altogether. His eyes narrowed as he studied Marcus's face. He had seen that face before. Not here. Somewhere else. A photograph. A ceremony. Maybe a briefing. The memory hovered just beyond reach. Mercer glanced at the watching soldiers, as though their silence confirmed his authority. "Should have listened the first time," he muttered. Marcus said nothing. He simply looked at his watch once more. 8:48. Then he raised his eyes to Mercer with the same measured calm that had carried him through 36 years of service. "Officer Mercer," he said, surprising the officer by using the name printed on his badge, "everything you needed to make the right decision was already in your hand." Mercer looked down at the identification card, but only for a second. He still didn't read it. And that single choice was about to become the most important decision of his career. 3 hours earlier, Marcus Reed had stepped out of a quiet hotel in downtown Richmond, carrying nothing more remarkable than a leather folder and a paper cup of black coffee. The morning air was cool, barely above 60 degrees, and the city had not fully awakened. Delivery trucks rolled through intersections. Traffic lights changed for nearly empty streets. Marcus paused beneath the hotel awning and checked his watch. 5:46 in the morning. He was early, exactly as he preferred. At 58, Marcus had spent 36 years learning that arriving early gave a man something more valuable than extra time. It gave him a chance to observe. His dark civilian jacket concealed every obvious sign of military rank. There were no ribbons across his chest, no silver stars on his shoulders. No uniform that could make strangers reconsider their assumptions before speaking to him. That was intentional. The government sedan waiting at the curb had been arranged to take him directly through Fort Grant's main entrance. But Marcus opened the rear door and gave the driver different instructions. "East gate, please." Drop me outside. The driver glanced at him through the mirror. Sir, Colonel Hayes is expecting you at headquarters. I know. Marcus took a slow sip of coffee. East Gate. The driver understood that the conversation was finished. 40 minutes later, the suburban landscape had given way to long stretches of highway, military signs, and fenced government property. Marcus watched everything through the window without saying much. Fort Grant had changed since his previous visit. New security barriers stood near the entrances. A training facility had been added beyond the eastern perimeter. Yet some things remained familiar. Soldiers moved with the same purposeful stride he remembered from bases across the country. Marcus had once been one of those young men, carrying more ambition than rank, wondering whether he would ever become the kind of leader people trusted when circumstances became difficult. Decades later, thousands of service members knew his name. That morning, however, Marcus wanted none of the ceremony that usually followed it. His phone vibrated. A message from Colonel Andrew Hayes appeared on the screen. The 8 o'clock briefing had been moved slightly later to accommodate several senior officials. The command staff had been notified. Marcus read the message once, locked the phone, and slipped it into his pocket. Beside him rested the leather folder. Inside were briefing materials marked for official use and documents connected to the reason for his visit. But Marcus had no intention of opening them before reaching headquarters. At 6:39, the sedan stopped roughly a quarter mile from the east gate. Marcus stepped out. You are sure about this, sir? The driver asked. Marcus gave him a small smile. It is a beautiful morning. I can walk a quarter mile. The sedan pulled away, leaving him beside a sidewalk bordered by trimmed grass and tall pine trees. Marcus started toward the gate at an unhurried pace. He could already see soldiers arriving for duty. Some were laughing quietly. Others carried coffee or folders. Nobody paid special attention to the older black man approaching in civilian clothes, and Marcus preferred it that way. For a few minutes, he was simply another person walking beneath the Virginia morning sky. Then a police cruiser turned into the access road behind him. It slowed. Marcus heard the engine before he looked back. Behind the windshield sat Officer Daniel Mercer. Mercer watched Marcus for several seconds, then glanced toward the restricted entrance ahead. He did not see the leather folder clearly. He did not know about the briefing room being prepared inside. He did not know Colonel Hayes was expecting Marcus personally. Most importantly, he did not know why Marcus had chosen to arrive without ceremony. The cruiser rolled alongside the curb and stopped. Marcus kept walking for 2 more steps before hearing the driver's door open. Sir, Mercer called. Marcus stopped and turned. His expression remained calm. Good morning, officer. Mercer studied him from several feet away, already forming a question that sounded less like curiosity and more like suspicion. Where exactly do you think you are going? Marcus looked toward the gate, then back at Mercer. It was the first question of the morning, and Marcus could already tell that the answer might not be what the officer was actually looking for. Fort Grant, Marcus answered, his voice even. Mercer looked past him toward the security checkpoint, then back at the leather folder in Marcus's hand. I can see that. I asked where you're going. Marcus studied the officer for a moment. There was nothing confrontational in his posture. His shoulders remained relaxed, his hands visible, his expression patient. Headquarters. Mercer gave a short, humorless laugh. Headquarters is not somewhere you just walk into. I'm aware of that. The answer was simple, but Mercer heard something else in it. Confidence. Maybe authority. And because he had already decided Marcus looked out of place, that confidence irritated him more than uncertainty would have. Do you work on this installation? Mercer asked. I am here for an official meeting. That was not my question. Marcus glanced toward the east gate. A line of vehicles was beginning to form beneath the morning light. Soldiers presented identification, barriers lifted, engines moved forward. Routine, order, procedure. Marcus had spent most of his life inside systems built around those words. He also knew how quickly procedure became something else when assumptions entered before facts. My identification will answer your questions, Marcus said. He reached slowly toward his jacket. Mercer immediately raised a hand. Keep your movements where I can see them. Marcus stopped. No argument. No sudden reaction. You asked for identification. Mercer hesitated, then motioned for him to continue. Marcus removed a government identification card and offered it to him. The card contained everything Mercer needed: Marcus Elijah Reed, Department of Defense credentials, official access authorization, and a photograph that matched the man standing 3 feet away. Mercer took it. His eyes touched the photograph, then Marcus's face, but he did not carefully read the information beneath the name. Instead, he looked at the leather folder. What is in there? Briefing material. For what? A meeting inside the installation. Mercer exhaled through his nose. You keep giving me the same answer. Because the answer has not changed. That was the moment the tone shifted. Mercer stepped slightly closer, holding the identification card between 2 fingers. You need to understand something. I decide whether your explanation makes sense here. Marcus looked at the card in Mercer's hand. No, officer. The identification establishes whether I am authorized to enter. Your responsibility is to verify it. The words were not loud. That almost made them heavier. A white pickup truck approaching the checkpoint slowed as the driver noticed the exchange. Near the gate, Captain Rachel Bennett had just arrived for duty. She recognized Mercer and watched from a distance, sensing the conversation had moved beyond an ordinary identification check. Mercer turned the card over as though searching for evidence that his first impression had been correct. He found none, but his expression did not soften. Why did you get dropped off outside the base? Because I chose to walk. Who dropped you off? My driver. Mercer looked toward the empty road behind Marcus. Your driver. Marcus heard the disbelief clearly. He had heard versions of that tone before, in airports, conference rooms, hotels, and places where people decided what belonged to him before asking his name. He did not react. Yes. Mercer handed nothing back. Instead, he reached toward the radio on his uniform. Stay right there. Marcus remained still as Mercer began requesting verification, but the officer read only part of the information from the card. Captain Bennett moved a few steps closer. She could now see Marcus clearly. Something about his posture caught her attention. He was not nervous. He was not confused. He was watching Mercer with the patience of someone allowing a process to reveal itself. Officer Mercer, Marcus said, you should read the entire identification. Mercer lowered his radio. I know how to do my job. Marcus held his gaze for a long second. Then do it completely. Mercer stared back, and in that quiet space between them, the misunderstanding stopped being accidental. The facts were already available. The only question left was whether Mercer was willing to see them. Mercer did not return the identification card. Instead, he slipped it against his palm and looked toward the east gate, where Captain Rachel Bennett was now standing close enough to hear every word. Is there a problem? She asked. Mercer answered without looking at her. I have it handled. Bennett's eyes moved from Mercer to Marcus, then to the government identification still in Mercer's hand. Did his credentials clear? I'm checking. Marcus remained silent. The morning had grown brighter, and traffic at the gate was increasing. Cars rolled forward in short intervals. Boots crossed concrete. Radios murmured beneath the steady sound of engines. Yet around Marcus, the normal rhythm of the installation seemed to slow. People were beginning to notice. Mercer noticed them noticing too. Instead of calming him, the attention appeared to make him more determined to prove that his suspicion had been justified. Open the folder, he told Marcus. Marcus looked down at the leather folder. No. Mercer blinked. Excuse me. Those materials are not for public inspection. You are standing outside a restricted military installation carrying documents you refuse to show me. I gave you identification that explains my authorization. Mercer raised the card slightly. And I told you I'm verifying it. Marcus waited. Bennett stepped closer. Daniel, let me see the identification. Mercer turned toward her. Rachel, I said I have it handled. Her expression tightened. Then verify the credentials and finish the stop. For the first time, irritation crossed Mercer's face openly. Marcus saw it and understood something important. This was no longer about a man walking toward a military gate. Mercer had attached his pride to being right. Every calm answer now sounded like a challenge, because admitting the identification was valid would require admitting that his first assumption had been wrong. Mercer turned back to Marcus. Put the folder down. Marcus carefully placed it beside his polished shoe. Now put your hands where I can see them. Marcus did. Several yards away, Sergeant Thomas Walker had stopped completely. The young soldier stared at Marcus with growing concentration. He knew that face. He was certain now. Months earlier, Walker had attended a leadership presentation streamed across several military installations. A senior general had spoken about discipline, responsibility, and the danger of making decisions before understanding the facts. Walker remembered the voice before he remembered the name. His eyes widened. Marcus noticed him. Their gazes met for less than a second. Walker almost stepped forward. Marcus gave the smallest shake of his head. Do not interfere. Walker froze. Mercer missed the exchange. Get down on the ground, he ordered. Bennett stared at him. Daniel, what exactly is the reason for that? Non-compliance. Marcus's expression changed slightly. I have complied with every lawful request related to verifying my identity. You refuse to open the folder because you have not established authority to inspect those materials. Mercer took a breath and pointed toward the pavement. I'm not asking again. The gate became strangely quiet. Marcus looked at Bennett, then Walker, then the identification card Mercer still had not fully read. Imagine knowing that one sentence could change the entire atmosphere. One rank, one position, 4 stars that would make every soldier within sight stand differently. Marcus could have said it. He chose not to. Officer Mercer, he said quietly, are you certain you want to continue this? Mercer interpreted the question exactly as Marcus expected. On the ground. Now, Marcus looked at his watch. 8:47 in the morning. Somewhere inside Fort Grant, senior officers were gathering around a conference table and waiting for the man standing outside their gate. Marcus slowly lowered himself to the pavement, keeping every movement controlled and visible. No shouting, no resistance, no attempt to use his status as a shield. Mercer believed he had finally established control. Walker knew otherwise. Bennett was beginning to suspect it, and Marcus, looking up from the ground with remarkable calm, knew that the most important question was no longer whether Mercer would discover who he was. It was whether Mercer would understand that Marcus should never have needed a rank to be treated fairly. For several seconds, nobody moved. Marcus remained where Mercer had ordered him, calm enough that the stillness itself began to feel uncomfortable. Around the east gate, soldiers who had been moving through another ordinary morning now watched without speaking. Some knew only that an older black man had been stopped. Others had heard enough of the exchange to understand that he had presented identification and repeatedly asked for it to be verified. Sergeant Thomas Walker knew something more. The memory had finally settled into place. General Marcus Elijah Reed, 4-star general, senior commander, the same man whose leadership address Walker had watched months earlier with hundreds of other soldiers. Walker took one instinctive step forward, but Marcus looked directly at him and gave another subtle shake of his head. It was not fear that stopped Walker. It was recognition of an order that had never been spoken aloud. Stay where you are. Let the process reveal itself. Mercer turned toward the young sergeant. Something you need? Walker hesitated. No, officer. Mercer nodded as if the answer confirmed that everything remained under control. Captain Rachel Bennett did not share his confidence. She moved closer and held out her hand. Daniel, give me the identification. Why? Because this has gone far enough without verification. Mercer looked at her, then at Marcus. He refused an inspection. Of a folder, Bennett replied. You still have not told me what came back on his identification. Mercer said nothing. That silence changed her expression. Bennett reached for her radio instead. I will verify it myself. Marcus watched her without interfering. Mercer immediately stepped closer. Rachel, there's no reason to turn this into something bigger. Bennett looked at him. Then it should take 30 seconds to clear up. She asked Marcus for his full name. He answered in the same measured voice he had used from the beginning. Marcus Elijah Reed. Walker lowered his eyes for a moment. There was no doubt now. Bennett repeated the name into the radio, along with the credential information she could read from where she stood. Static followed, then silence. Mercer folded his arms. You see, they are checking. Marcus looked at him. They should. The response bothered Mercer because there was still no panic in it. No desprite explanation. No attempt to impress anyone. Marcus had spent decades learning that character was clearest when authority was removed from the room. Right now, Mercer believed Marcus had none. That made every choice more revealing. The radio crackled. Captain Bennett, repeat the name. Bennett lifted the radio closer. Marcus Elijah Reed. Another pause. Longer this time. Bennett glanced at Marcus. Stand by. The voice disappeared. Mercer gave a dismissive shrug. Probably a database issue. Bennett did not answer. Walker stared toward headquarters nearly half a mile inside the installation. Marcus checked his watch. 8:49. 2 minutes had passed since Mercer gave the order. 2 minutes in which the officer could have looked carefully at the identification in his own hand. Marcus finally spoke. Officer Mercer, did you read the authorization line? Mercer looked down at the card. His thumb shifted slightly, uncovering information he had ignored. His eyes moved across the printed words, and for the first time, uncertainty appeared. Before he could speak, Bennett's radio came alive again. The voice on the other end had changed. It was sharper now. Captain Bennett, Command Center. Confirm your location. East Gate. And confirm Marcus Reed is physically there with you. Bennett looked at the man on the pavement. Confirmed. There was a brief silence, followed by a question so simple that Mercer finally stopped looking confident. Captain, why is General Reed being held at the East Gate? Captain Bennett did not answer immediately. The question from Command Center seemed to change the temperature around the East Gate. Mercer stared at the identification card in his hand, reading the name again as though the letters might rearrange themselves into something less serious. Marcus Elijah Reed. This time, his eyes continued below the name. Department of Defense. Senior Command Authorization. The information had been there from the beginning. Bennett raised her radio. Command Center, there is a security stop involving General Reed. His identification is being verified now. The reply came almost instantly. His credentials are confirmed. Maintain the scene. Colonel Hayes has been notified. Mercer looked at Bennett. Colonel? She did not respond. Her attention remained on Marcus, who was still waiting with the same controlled patience he had shown from the first question. General Reed, Bennett said carefully, your credentials have been confirmed. Mercer turned sharply toward her. Wait, we do not know that he is actually the same person. Bennett stared at him in disbelief. Daniel, the photograph matches, the credentials match, and Command Center just confirmed his identity. Mercer looked around. Soldiers were watching now. The certainty he had carried minutes earlier was beginning to disappear, but pride kept him from taking the simplest path available. He could have apologized. He could have returned the card. He could have admitted that he had made an assumption before checking the facts. Instead, he searched for another reason to delay. There could still be a security issue. Marcus finally spoke, then stated. Mercer looked at him. What? State the security issue you believe remains. Mercer opened his mouth, but no answer came. Bennett heard the silence. So did Walker. Marcus did not press him. He simply waited. That restraint made the moment heavier than anger ever could. A radio sounded near the gatehouse. Another soldier answered, listened, and immediately straightened. Then a second call came through. Headquarters was asking for the East Gate. Inside the main administrative building, the morning briefing had already begun without its most important participant. Senior officers sat around a long polished table beneath framed unit colors and photographs of previous commanders. At the head of the table, one chair remained empty. In front of it rested a white nameplate with black lettering, General Marcus E. Reed. Colonel Andrew Hayes glanced at the empty chair, then at the wall clock. His aide entered quietly and handed him a message. Hayes read it once. His expression changed. Where is he? He asked. East Gate, sir. Hayes looked back at the message. Why? The aide hesitated. There was a security stop. Hayes closed the briefing folder in front of him. The room went silent. Every officer at the table knew Marcus Reed had been expected personally by the base commander. Hayes stood. Everyone else instinctively began to rise, but he lifted one hand. Stay here. He walked toward the door, his pace measured rather than hurried. Back at the gate, Mercer still held Marcus's identification. Walker watched the road leading from headquarters. Bennett did the same. Marcus checked his watch. 8:52. 5 minutes had passed since the order that brought him to the pavement. Then movement appeared in the distance. A command vehicle turned onto the road leading toward the east gate. Mercer noticed it and frowned. Bennett recognized it immediately. Walker stood straighter. The vehicle stopped several yards away. The rear door opened, and Colonel Andrew Hayes stepped out. He did not look confused. He did not ask why he had been called. His eyes found Marcus immediately, and the expression on his face told Mercer something the identification card should have told him minutes earlier. The man he had refused to see clearly was the man the entire command had been waiting for. Colonel Andrew Hayes closed the vehicle door and stood still for one long second. He was 51, broad-shouldered, silver beginning to show at his temples, and known across Fort Grant as a commander who rarely wasted words. His gaze moved from Captain Bennett to Officer Mercer, then settled on Marcus. Nothing about Hayes suggested panic. That made his presence more commanding. He walked forward at a measured pace while the soldiers near the gate instinctively straightened. Mercer glanced at Bennett, searching her expression for some explanation that might make the situation smaller than it suddenly felt. She gave him none. "Colonel Hayes," Mercer began, "I can explain what happened." Hayes continued walking. "Not yet." 2 words. Quiet. Final. Mercer stopped talking. Hayes passed him without another glance and approached Marcus. Sergeant Walker watched closely. He had imagined what would happen when the base commander arrived. Maybe questions. Maybe confusion. Instead, Hayes did something far simpler. He stopped several feet from Marcus, brought himself to attention, and raised a formal salute. "General Reed, sir." The words traveled across the checkpoint with astonishing clarity. Walker immediately came to attention. Bennett followed. Then the soldiers nearby did the same as recognition spread through the gate. Mercer remained motionless, Marcus's identification card still in his hand. "General." The word seemed to erase every explanation he had been preparing. Marcus rose slowly, adjusted his jacket, and returned Hayes' salute with practiced calm. There was no satisfaction on his face, no ismite, no look toward Mercer, demanding that everyone witness his embarrassment. "At ease," Marcus said. The soldiers relaxed, but the silence remained. Hayes looked at him carefully. "Sir, I was informed there was a problem at the gate." Marcus glanced toward Mercer. There was a decision at the gate. Hayes understood the distinction immediately. Mercer stepped forward. "Colonel, I observed an unidentified individual approaching a restricted entrance, and when I attempted to determine his purpose, he refused to let me inspect the folder he was carrying." Marcus said nothing. Hayes turned to Bennett. "Captain, did General Reed provide identification?" "Yes, sir." "Was it valid?" "Yes, sir." Command Center confirmed it. Hayes looked at Mercer. "When was the identification provided?" Mercer hesitated. "Early in the stop." "Before or after you ordered him to the ground?" Another pause. "Before." The answer hung in the air. Hayes did not raise his voice. "Did you read the entire credential?" Mercer looked down at the card. "I was in the process of verifying it." Marcus finally spoke. "Colonelle." Hayes turned immediately. "Sir." Marcus nodded toward the identification. "Ask him what caused the stop." Mercer looked up. The question was different from the ones he had expected. Marcus was not asking why his rank had been ignored. He was asking why he had been stopped before his rank was known. Hayes faced Mercer again. "What specific conduct caused you to stop General Reed?" Mercer shifted his weight. He was walking toward the east gate. Hayes waited, and he did not appear to have an escort. Is an escort required for a pedestrian approaching the security checkpoint? Mercer did not answer. Bennett looked toward the ground. Walker remained silent. Marcus watched Mercer with neither anger nor sympathy, only patience. Hayes asked again, "What specific rule did he violate before you stopped him?" The morning sounds slowly returned around them. An engine idled. A flag moved overhead. Somewhere beyond the gate, a radio called out a routine message. Mercer looked at the identification card he had held for several minutes, then at the black man whose authority had finally become impossible to ignore. But Marcus had already made the real question clear. for stars could explain why a base commander had come personally to the gate. They could not explain why basic fairness had required his arrival. Mercer had no immediate answer. Colonel Hayes waited without helping him find one. That silence mattered because every explanation available now had to compete with the facts already established. Marcus had approached a public security checkpoint on foot. He had answered the officer's questions. He had provided valid government identification. He had kept his hands visible and remained calm. The only thing he had refused was access to official briefing material Mercer had never established a reason to inspect. Hayes looked toward Captain Bennett. "I want the complete record preserved. Radio traffic, gate communications, credential checks, and Officer Mercer's body camera recording." Bennett nodded. "Yes, sir." Mercer finally found his voice. "Colonel, I was trying to protect the installation." Hayes looked at him. "Security is not the issue. Procedure is." Marcus watched Mercer carefully. The officer's confidence had disappeared, but Marcus did not seem interested in replacing it with humiliation. "Return my identification, please," he said. Mercer stepped forward and handed him the card. Marcus examined it briefly before placing it inside his jacket. "Thank you." The courtesy somehow made Mercer look even more unsettled. Hayes turned toward Marcus. "General Reed, I apologize for what happened at my gate." Marcus shook his head once. "Do not apologize before you know exactly what happened." Hayes paused. Marcus continued. "Review the record. Interview everyone who witnessed it. Determine whether policy was followed. Then act on facts, not embarrassment." Bennett looked at him with quiet respect. Walker did the same. This was the part Mercer had not expected. Marcus had enough authority to demand immediate consequences, but he refused to turn authority into revenge. "Sir," Hayes said, "I can have Officer Mercer removed from gate duty pending review." Marcus looked toward Mercer, then toward the soldiers who had watched the encounter unfold. "That is your command decision. Make it according to policy." Hayes nodded. "Understood." Mercer swallowed. "General Reed, I did not know who you were." Marcus's expression remained steady. "That is exactly the problem." Mercer looked confused. Marcus stepped closer, leaving several feet between them. "You think the mistake was failing to recognize a general?" "It was not." The gate became quiet again. "Suppose I had been a civilian contractor. Suppose I had been a father arriving for an approved appointment. Suppose I had been any other black man walking toward this checkpoint with valid identification. Would the facts have deserved less attention?" Mercer lowered his eyes. Marcus continued, his voice calm enough that nobody could mistake the words for anger. "My rank should not determine whether you read an identification card before making a judgment." Hayes glanced toward Bennett. She understood immediately why Marcus had never announced himself. He had not been testing Mercer. He had simply refused to use status to purchase treatment that should have been ordinary. Bennett's radio sounded again. Headquarters wanted to know whether the scheduled briefing would proceed. Hayes looked at Marcus. "They are waiting for you, sir." Marcus checked his watch. 8:57. 10 minutes since he had first looked at it, while Mercer believed he controlled the situation. "They can wait another 5 minutes." Hayes raised an eyebrow. Marcus turned toward Bennett. "Captain, when you write your statement, do not write that this became serious because I was a 4-star general." Bennett listened closely. "Write what happened before anyone knew my rank." She nodded. "Yes, sir." Marcus looked toward Walker next. "Sergeant, you recognized me." Walker straightened. "Yes, sir. And you stayed back. You signaled me not to interfere, sir." Marcus gave a small nod. "Good. Your statement should begin before you recognized me, too." Mercer looked from one face to another as the shape of the coming review became clear. His career would not be judged by the embarrassment of choosing the wrong man. It would be judged by the choices he made when he believed the man in front of him had no power at all. By 9:02 that morning, Marcus Reed was finally walking through the east gate of Fort Grant. Colonel Andrew Hayes walked beside him while Captain Rachel Bennett remained behind to begin documenting the incident exactly as it had happened. Officer Daniel Mercer had been relieved from gate duty pending formal review, not because Marcus demanded punishment, but because Hayes understood that accountability required distance, evidence, and time. Sergeant Thomas Walker watched Marcus disappear toward headquarters and thought about the moment he had recognized him. The 4 stars had changed everyone's posture, but they had not changed the facts. Those facts were already there when Marcus had been treated as though his explanation carried less weight than Mercer's suspicion. Inside headquarters, the senior officers waiting around the conference table rose when Marcus entered. He returned their greeting and looked at the empty chair bearing his name. 10 minutes earlier, that chair had represented authority. Outside the gate, he had possessed the same authority without the nameplate, the uniform, or the stars. "Please sit," Marcus said. Before opening the briefing folder, he looked toward Hayes. "I want the East Gate review handled independently." Hayes nodded. "It will be, and I want the question framed correctly." The room waited. This is not an investigation into why an officer failed to recognize a general. It is an investigation into whether an officer allowed assumptions to replace procedure. No one spoke for several seconds. Over the following days, the record was reviewed carefully. The radio traffic established when Marcus had provided his name. The credential system established that his authorization was valid. Bennett and Walker gave statements describing what they had seen before either of them understood the full situation. Most importantly, the body camera record showed the sequence without rank, reputation, or emotion rewriting it afterward. Mercer had been given information. He had chosen suspicion first. The formal review found that he had failed to follow required verification procedures and had escalated an encounter without a clear security basis. He was removed from security duties while the department completed disciplinary proceedings and additional review of previous complaints. Marcus never requested a harsher result. He requested only that the same standards apply whether the person at the gate carried 4 stars or no title at all. Several weeks later, Marcus returned to Fort Grant for a leadership forum. Sergeant Walker was among the young service members in attendance. At the end, someone asked Marcus what lesson he had taken from that morning. Marcus looked across the room before answering. "Authority tells people what you are allowed to do. Character determines what you choose to do." The room became still. "That officer told me he did not know who I was. I believe him, but fairness cannot depend on knowing someone's resume." Walker remembered 8:47 in the morning, the quiet checkpoint, the identification card waiting to be read, and the chance Mercer had been given to correct his own assumption. Marcus remembered it too. "You still have time to correct this." The sentence had never been a warning about what 4 stars could do to Mercer's career. It had been an invitation to stop, look at the evidence, and choose differently. That was the truth Mercer understood too late. The stars did not make Marcus worthy of dignity. They only made everyone notice the moment his dignity had been overlooked. And in the end, justice did not arrive through revenge, humiliation, or power used in return. It arrived through the record, through accountability, and through one principle that should never have required a general to prove. Respect is not something a person earns with rank. It is where fairness is supposed to begin.